Our next session, too, is From Quad to BRICS, Decoding India's Foreign Policy. We're going to explore India's unique role in very different international groupings. As a member of the Quad, India supports a free, open Pacific and maritime security, and they are partnering with the US, Japan, and Australia. And it's nice to see the Japan Consul General Osumi here. Thank you for joining us. And a founding member of BRICS, partnering with China and Russia. You guys can go ahead up on stage and take a seat. How does India balance these contrasting priorities, and what does this tell us about its long-term global ambitions? So, here to talk about all of that and also the headlines regarding Pakistan, we have Dr. Rafiq Dossani, Senior Economist and Professor at RAND, and Dr. Šumit Ganguly, Senior Fellow at Hoover Institution. Please join me in welcoming both of them.
Thank you, Margaret, for that kind introduction. Thank you for inviting me and for organizing this panel. Certainly looking forward to this dialogue between us and then with the whole audience. So, as Margaret mentioned, things are moving very fast. So one can't really talk about BRICS and Quads only. There's a matter of US-India relations that are moving very fast. The Pakistan conflict with India has had an impact on these relations. So we'll try and cover many of these issues first as a dialogue between us, and then open up to the audience for Q&A. So maybe we could start with looking at the recent conflict between India and Pakistan, and let me ask Šumit to give his sense of where that leaves India. If you see the media over here, it seems to say that, while everyone was very supportive of the Indian stance after the Pahalgam terrorist incident, and blamed Pakistan for it, the aftermath, which was the Indian retaliation, got much less support. And what does that tell us about India's position in its ability to, either was it something that India should have done differently? Should it have been a case where, was it just diplomacy that was lacking? What changed, in your opinion?
Thanks very much, Rafiq. And let me echo your sentiments about being invited to this event at the Asia Society. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon, and I hope this will lead to many more similar engagements in the future. Your question is a very pertinent one, because initially there was a great deal of support for India in the wake of the vicious and callous Pahalgam attack by the terrorists and the deaths of 26 hapless picnickers. But subsequently, with the Indian response, the kinetic response from India, and the airstrikes and the missile strikes and the artillery barrages, there was less of an outpouring of sympathy for India. Your characterization, I think, is entirely correct. The question is why? I think in considerable part, it's because India and Pakistan have fought 4 wars, 3 of which have been over Kashmir in 1947, 48, 1965, and then again in 1999. The 71 war was not over Kashmir. And there have been multiple crises that have characterized relations. As a consequence, there is this fear that one of these crises between 2 nuclear-armed powers could potentially escalate, even though no one intended escalation. This is what political scientists call inadvertent escalation. And because of the fears of inadvertent escalation, when India struck back with considerable vigor, the fear was that this could spiral out of control. And consequently, the support for India was a bit more muted. And also there was this kind of, on the one hand, and then on the other hand, kind of response that ensued.
Oh, by the way, I should point out that Šumit and I know each other for a while. How many years now?
Close to 60.
60, yeah. So we went to school together and have kept sort of loosely in touch since. So if our conversation, this was St. Xavier's School in Calcutta. So if our conversation shifts to Calcutta, sometimes it's okay, perhaps, yeah. Because if once you get Šumit started on mache chhol recipe, that's the end of it. And or me started on Mohan Bagan and Mamadou Sporting in my time.
So, you still remember those?
Yes. Who could forget that? Those are really the important things in life, I think. So, the point you're making, Šumit, is that in some way it was a fear of inadvertent escalation of a situation. But does that not also come with it as an assumption that the two sides, India and Pakistan, were not aware of that?
Yes, of course. And ever since India and Pakistan crossed the nuclear threshold in May 1998, there has been a drumbeat from certain sections of the US foreign and security policy establishment that a nuclear war is almost imminent in South Asia. You will recall that President Clinton said that this is the most dangerous place on earth. That phrase became quite commonplace after he used it. And at one point at a conference in Washington, D.C., if I may be so self-referential, I said, actually, President Clinton has it wrong. The most dangerous place on earth is much more likely to be somewhere in Europe. Rather than India and Pakistan, which did not go over very well with the audience because this was a principally US government audience. But bluntly stated...
You committed a Crimea.
Yes, exactly. Wonderful pun. Also, a certain Assistant Secretary of State under Clinton echoed his words, and I said that conditions in Kashmir may be bad because this was the peak of the insurgency, but I said it does not constitute a civil war. This is much more comparable to the troubles in Northern Ireland, and Srinagar might resemble Derry or Belfast, but this is not a civil war. She had referred to this as a civil war. Part of it was, I think, simply motivated reasoning to focus global attention on India and Pakistan, and the Clinton administration's explicit goal was to cap, roll back, and eliminate, that's the exact phraseology, of the Indian and Pakistani nuclear weapons programs. That I thought was a fool's errand and a chimera, and it didn't happen and hasn't happened. And also, as I've argued with members of the non-proliferation community in this country, yes, there have been near misses, but near misses only count in horseshoes and hand grenades. Near misses don't count. There were lots of near misses during the Cold War. A flight of Canadian geese at one point set off a nuclear alert at NORAD. And this is not an apocryphal story. It's recounted by one of my colleagues at Stanford, Scott Sagan, who's one of the world's authorities on nuclear deterrence.
So let's talk a bit about, it reminds me a bit, as you're speaking, of the situation with North Korea. With South Korea, announced that it was interested in acquiring nuclear weapons, the West quickly clamped down on them and said, no, 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 you mustn't do that. And another of our colleagues at Stanford, Siegfried Hecker, no less than a person as him, said, North Korea will lose its culture if if it gets a nuclear weapon. And I asked him, why, are they not aware of that? Why are you giving them lectures about loss of culture? The Koreans know much better. I think there's this difference of viewpoint that comes across when you're in something and out of it. So, but given the situation as it is, how has it affected US-India relations? At one level, there's this feeling that it's had a big effect because, it might be because it's a different administration. But had it been the early administration of Biden when this terrorist attack had happened and India had responded as it did, it would have been completely different set of reactions, and that the world following the US has behaved differently. For example, and people are calling India to task also, saying that why is the Indian government refusing to acknowledge the role of the US? Now, India is saying they didn't take mediation. US is saying it did. We have the Russian spokesman for the President Putin, saying, no, the US played a role. So tell me what you think all these come together in terms of US-India relations.
Three quick responses. Number one, under Biden, there were individuals in office who had a deep understanding of India. And who were focused on day-to-day affairs. Currently, there is no Assistant Secretary of State. A mutual friend is about to become the Assistant Secretary, but he's still not there. Mutual friend and co-author, actually. Second, there is no ambassador in New Delhi at the moment. So with this kind of institutional vacuum, obviously careless statements could be made by a president who is noted for making careless statements, and that's not a partisan remark. He changes his mind on a dime. And so I'm hardly shocked that he claims that he played this extraordinary role, even while pointing out, quite historically inaccurately, I might add, that Indians and Pakistanis have been fighting for thousands of years. To my knowledge, Indians and Pakistanis didn't exist until the 14th and the 15th of August, 1947. And even with my limited mathematical knowledge, that doesn't amount to 1,000 years.
I remember that from school days, yeah.
Yes.
Limited, yeah.
What can I? Yes, that's right. But let's not get into my limited knowledge of mathematics. So the Biden administration, I think, would have responded markedly differently than this administration did. Second, a statement coming from Moscow affirming Trump's extraordinary role in diffusing this crisis needs to be taken not with a pinch of salt, but an entire salt shaker. So I wouldn't attach any great deal of credence to that. And third, and finally, the notion that India, which now has the fourth and possibly the fifth or possibly the fourth largest economy in the world, much more self-confident than it was during the Cold War, would accept mediation, borders on the laughable. Ever since India's unfortunate experience at the hands of the UN in 1947-48, when it foolishly took the Kashmir case to the UN Security Council, and where it quickly became embroiled in Cold War politics, India has resisted the idea of third-party mediation. So the notion that today India would accept third-party mediation and thereby diffuse the crisis not only borders on the laughable, but is laughable.
I think India refused mediation to solve the Kashmir issue.
Yeah.
That was not offered by Trump, right? He offered to mediate, but we don't know that India accepted that.
No.
The only thing that we know or what we hear is that President Trump said that I mediated the ceasefire. My own view is I think the Indian government should be much more forthcoming and talking about rather than remain completely silent and letting the weight of opinion, public opinion, shift that way. But let's get on with our alphabets here. So we have the Quad and we have the BRICS, and there are many others, right? So the interesting thing I thought is that next, the G7 is coming up in a week. Then next month we have the, from 4th to 7th July, we have the meeting of the BRICS. Then you have coming up the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Then of course you have the APEC conference, which India is not invited. It's not a member of APEC. So given all these shifts, some of these are, although they have different purposes, right? APEC was not designed to be a security gathering. Quad explicitly said it's not when it moved from QST to Quad. But all of them in one way or the other have a security component to them and an international relations component to them. India is seen as sort of dancing with elephants and dragons and wolves and so on, being part of SCO, or to keep China relationship going, part of BRICS, Russia and China, Quad, of course, the Western alliances. Would you see this changing, or do you think India will keep having to do this balancing act for a while?
I think for the foreseeable future, India will remain embedded in this alphabet soup, and some of it is actually rather pointless. I mean, BRICS has lost all meaning now. First of all, they have expanded to a disproportionate degree. Russia's economy is smaller than that of the Netherlands. Okay, so it really doesn't belong in that grouping. But were it not for the fact it has nuclear weapons and hypersonic missiles and its size and is a kind of a sectoral power based upon natural resources, it's really no longer a superpower, one. Two, there are important differences which are irresolvable between China and India. So this whole notion of India and China cooperating in the BRICS is kind of pointless. And Brazil has its own concerns. South Africa has its own concerns. So BRICS it's a set of crumbling bricks. Mm-hmm. The SCO, India is a member of SCO largely to keep an eye on China because the Chinese initiated the SCO. Otherwise, India's role in the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, is rather limited. The Quad, however, matters a great deal, and much depends on whether or not Trump pays any real heed to this minilateral organization. And that we'll find out once he attends the Quad summit, this time in India. Underlying the Quad, of course, there always has been a security imperative, though not publicly stated. And that is this covert concern about the PRC.
Of course.
Without that, the Quad wouldn't exist.
Well, that's not what they say.
That's not what they say publicly.
I mean, it's actually quite funny when you see this. They keep saying we're there for ASEAN, for the ASEAN way of living. We recognize the authority of ASEAN, ASEAN centrality, and then you see what they do regarding ASEAN, and it's almost nothing. They announced a scholarship for ASEAN. I don't know if you saw the numbers. So it was $2 million was given. 2 million, that's it, for scholarship for ASEAN. And then of that, then 80% was kept for the 4 Quad countries. Only 20% was given to ASEAN countries. It means about $30,000 per country. So that'll
take you far.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the ASEAN thing, of course, is very silly about Quad. And I wrote an op-ed saying that it's actually a failure from that point of view. But coming to what I understand from what you're saying, that like Lutnick is suggesting, dump the BRICS, don't buy Russian arms, stay with the US. Is that right? Does that capture what you?
Oh, I think that captures exactly what he said, but
I mean,
it also
do you buy
reveals an extraordinary level of ignorance.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, because how do you dismantle your entire arsenal? How do you disentangle your, not entire, but close to 60% of your arsenal is composed of Soviet or Russian weaponry. And any economist, and you're one, would know there's a term called path dependence. How do you break that path dependence overnight? For the Commerce Secretary to suggest this reveals a lack of a complete lack of understanding of economic science.
So, I mean, India has been cutting down on Russian.
Yes.
It's now down to about 36% on an annual basis.
Yeah.
But still, you're right, 60% of the
overall
stock.
arsenal.
But within the next 10 years, that'll change dramatically. I think the problem is, as far as the US is concerned, is that the replacements are not US. The replacement is France, China, Israel, and which is the third country. It'll come back to me. So, the US isn't getting much out of this exchange. Anyway, and India is actually a very small importer of arms. It exports more than it imports. So that's sort of interesting that we're in a situation where India has nearly the world's largest budget for arms, on defense, among, if you leave out China and the US, and yet it doesn't spend much on imports because the cost of army personnel is so high. Anyway, I keep seeing these signs, so we'll move now to Q&A, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely. We can return to this question later on.
After Mohan Bagan, yeah. Yes, please. There, then Asha. Yes.
Hi,
Oh, you can sit, just tell us your name. Yeah.
I'm Mary Kay Magstud. I'm a former China correspondent for public radio here, and also I've worked for Asia Society. I'm interested in a couple of things. First of all, as you look over the last 6 months, how would you describe the way India's foreign policy has been recalibrating based on the new Trump administration and how it approaches foreign policy with India and with China? What would you describe as the level of trust that Indian policymakers have in the United States now and with China? And how much does that matter? Is it just a matter of pragmatism and looking for supporting and protecting India's interests? And in terms of India's interests, how would you describe what you each see as the goals for India's long-term foreign policy and India's place in the world, like over the next decade or two?
Okay, let's take two questions and we'll answer. Asha?
Yes, the level of ignorance that both of you referred to just now, both from, and as we could see in public statements from Trump, President Trump and Howard Lutnick, it's mind-boggling level of ignorance. Both of you, if you could please speak a little bit about what would be the mechanisms by which we can fix that gap, right? What do we do? Do we take
like
members?
IQ tests and so on?
Trump
aced that, right? So.
Correct, yeah. Do we take members of Congress to India? What do we do? How do we get, how do we fix this gap? The gap is huge. There is,
so
no
in
doubt.
some ways the questions are linked, So what is your name? Maggie, right? Okay. Your question and Asha's question. Your question is, how should India place itself thinking about the long term in its relations with China and the US, right? And Asha's question is, how do you sort of upgrade the US relationship by, in your opinion, getting rid of a level of ignorance that I assume, like Šumit, you find mind-boggling? Yeah, I have a different opinion. I don't think it's ignorance. I think it's very strategic, but we can discuss that. So, on to you, sir, for the ignorance part.
How would I respond? To Asha's question, I think you provided the answer. I think we really need to make a concerted effort to inform Congress. To the extent that Congress has any role at all in this administration, it seems completely supine before the president. But to the extent that we can, we should try and influence Congress, and we should raise public awareness of these issues. You know, it reminds me of a great book by a brilliant American anthropologist, a book by Harold Isaacs called Scratches on Our Minds, American Images of China and India. China is no longer a scratch on our minds. It's more like a gash on our minds. But India sadly still remains a scratch on our minds. The level of ignorance that exists in India, even after teaching about India for the last 40 years, I find appalling. And we really now need to make a concerted effort to enhance India's profile in the United States in the minds of our fellow citizens. To turn to your question, Mary Kay, with China, there's just been a pause. The Indians simply cannot afford at the moment to alienate China, even though anybody of any consequence in the foreign and security policy establishments in India will tell you that this is their long-term threat. Pakistan is an irritant. It's a gnat that keeps flying into your room and stings you periodically. But China poses a long-term threat, and India is locked into an enduring rivalry. But at the moment, India lacks the wherewithal to cope with this threat. And so it's a kind of a pause in the relationship. And there are these anodyne statements coming from Delhi and from Beijing. That's for the consumption of the Rotary Club. They don't amount to a hill of beans. In terms of the US, I recently argued in an article that's coming out that today the Indo-US relationship, the ignorance aside, has reached a certain ballast which it never had during the Cold War. It's a multifaceted relationship. It is linked to defense. It's linked to investment, trade, and economics. It's dependent on the increasingly assertive diaspora in this country and people-to-people contacts thereby. And so a president and a particular administration can retard that relationship or can boost that relationship. But now it's an enduring relationship. It's an enduring partnership. Unlike during the Cold War, it was really about foreign policy by making faces.
So, Šumit, I made a list of, going back from Clinton's administration to the present time, a list of what were America's key Asian policy concerns between then and now. And I got a list of about 15, and I have it, I can share it with you, and I'm happy to talk about it, but we don't have much time. But of those 15, China figured in most of them, India only in 3. From a US point of view, there's a completely different view of India as a result of that sort of large strategic thinking. Consider, for example, regional stability. From the US point of view, India should be the manager of South Asia. Managing South Asia means stability, means prosperity, means getting along. Okay, so it's tough. It's a tough neighborhood. You had a lot of trouble with Pakistan, no doubt, but also now with Bangladesh, historically with Nepal, with Sri Lanka, different countries. So from the US point of view, now I'm not saying from an Indian point of view, I can see all the pressures each time. But from a US point of view, it's clear that this is an irritant because it's not solving the problem of world peace. The regional stability is a must if India is ever to become a great power, if it can't look after its region. So I think from that point of view, I can see the US, I can understand the US point of view quite clearly. And I think there's some substance there. But let's go on to the next question. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Nihar Shah from Lawrence Berkeley Lab. I do a lot of work on international energy and climate policy. But one of the questions I've had, I think the first meeting that Secretary of State Rubio had was with the Quad, first multilateral meeting. And the readout that came out was on essentially secure supply chains. Mm-hmm. Now, when you see this whole thing that, now there's like all these trade agreements that are being negotiated, to what degree do you see both India and the Quad playing a role in essentially, being either a replacement or a bulwark or like providing more stability with respect to supply chains? Because it seems like that was at least initially the thinking. And then again, I think this is with respect to China.
What kind of supply chains are you talking about? Which guy?
Well, I mean, the initial readout didn't specify, and I guess that's part of the negotiations that are going on right now.
I read the readout. It's a very preliminary sort of casual readout. There's nothing in it.
Right.
Unlike earlier readouts with Blinken and so on, which ran into pages and pages. This was like a one-page document saying, we got to do this stuff. It has no meaning at all. I don't know if you have a different perspective on that, Šumit.
Well, anyway, I was just assuming that it'll be fleshed out a little bit more. So I think it's being fleshed out now, but I'm just wondering what your opinion is on that.
I think policy on this issue is quite muddled under this administration, because for all the talk of supply chains, Trump also wants to reshore everything to the United States. And this is completely contradictory. Either you take friendshoring seriously and let Apple invest in India and develop iPhones in India, or you manufacture them in Ohio and we'll pay $2,000 for an iPhone. There seems to be really a policy incoherence here. So, I think your question is very important, but I don't think we have a clear set of policies that have emerged yet. It seems quite muddled and wrong-headed in many ways.
Well, you can see the difference in perspective between the two administrations. The Rubio readout with the foreign ministers had no mention of ASEAN for the first time since the start. It dropped, if you see the Trump-Modi compact, right, the military, whatever, technology and other alliance that President Trump and Prime Minister Modi agreed to work together on, and which was signed in February, all mention of collaboration for production, semiconductor manufacturing, academic collaboration, all that has been dropped. So it's not an insignificant, thoughtless exercise. I think this has been done very deliberately and very carefully, keeping Trump's ideology in mind. Manufacture here, pay $2,000, let them pay $500 in India if it's for the Indian market, but here they have to pay. Fine, yeah. Any more questions? Here, one. Ishwar.
Just on BRICS and Shanghai Cooperation, I agree they're kind of meaningless, but both President Trump and Lutnick have made comments about BRICS. Wouldn't it be in American interest that you have India part of those organizations where it keeps China in check, even if they're meaningless, rather than China having all these large number of countries supposedly on the side? I mean,
Šumit?
Yeah. With the policies that this administration is pursuing, it's essentially handing over entire parts of the world to the PRC. Just this afternoon, I read that all US aid is now in abeyance, if not altogether suspended. The PRC is going to jump into this breach. They already have in Africa. So far from making America great again, we are witnessing in real time the decline of the United States and the loss of influence across the world. And this is not a partisan statement. I am merely reflecting what's happening. And India's role in the BRICS is ceremonial. So India's ability to check China in the BRICS, let alone in the SCO, is impossible. Currently, India's biggest concern is the Himalayan border. That's where the bulk of its energies are focused, and should be focused. And the next thing will be the Indian Ocean, as the People's Liberation Army Navy continues to expand its reach into the Indian Ocean littoral. And India needs to ramp up its capabilities and work with the United States to the extent possible and with the Quad to ensure that China does not have a free run in the Indian Ocean. The one point of vulnerability for the PRC, because close to 80% of its hydrocarbons come from the Middle East and through the Straits of Malacca.
So, Ishwar, your comment suggests also, why you're saying the US should want India to be there as a lookout post, right? But it's not that China and Russia don't know that this is possible. So they're not going to discuss on those terms that giving out information that the postman sends to the US. It's a different world, I think. And actually, I think India was very keen to join SCO. It wasn't like that someone asked it to join. It was admitted late because China didn't want them, but Russia finally persuaded China to take them in. And the BRICS expansion, I agree with Šumit, it weakens the BRICS in many respects. But China's idea is we want de-dollarization, and this is a way to do it, so we need to expand membership. Perfectly rational. Yes, one question there. Oh, sorry, that one first, yeah.
Good afternoon. I'm Sarab with the Gates Foundation, and thank you so much for decoding the alphabets, talking about the concerns and the challenges. I was hoping this was the last question and we could close on a level of optimism, but I'm sure this would be an interesting...
Ask a happy question.
Yes, ask a happy question,
No problem.
So I just wanted to ask, if there's any message on optimism when we think about the challenges, but an ideal state, if there is, when we think about the India's foreign policy or something that you could
from Kolkata, we don't have optimism.
With all the sweets you come, from, I doubt it, but yes, I would still have the experts speak on that.
Okay, you be optimistic, I'll be optimistic.
I am optimistic about India's future as long as certain policies are implemented and certain policy changes are made, because the ingredients are all there. It's a question of how you bring those ingredients together. So I am not suggesting a future of gloom and doom. On the contrary, I'm much more concerned about the disarray in American foreign policy and the retreat of American foreign policy from the world. That concerns me far more than the long-term future of India, which depends mostly on a handful of policy choices. And that would require another session, which I'm sure the Asia Society will organize in due course.
So it's a mix of optimism and pessimism in India. So I'll take a more optimistic view, which I think that India should grow at 10% plus a year. It has the talent, it has now the infrastructure, it has everything going for it, But I think where it's failed significantly is actually in foreign policy. It should have been much more careful of its region, taken that as what foreign policy means, not playing with China and, China of course has to play with, but the US and so on, before it was ready, it should keep its head down, in the way that China did till 2013. I'm getting pessimistic again, but I think that, going back to the right policy, much more independent, be like Mrs. Gandhi, tell people off if they don't suit your strategies. That's what we should be. We should be seen as more, I'm an American citizen. India should be seen as a morally high integrity country, which gets compromised because of regional problems. Sort of optimistic, your question is.
Yeah, I hesitated to ask the question, but because I thought the answer would be complex. But it seems to me, and it's a neutral one, not a happy or, sorry.
That's all right.
The question I have is, you have presented India's foreign policy, sorry.
It's your wife. Take it, sorry. We can
It was a warning.
I don't know why. Sorry. From a point, you said decoding India's foreign policy. You're decoding it in the context of American lens. One, it's very much focused on foreign security policy. Good. Secondly, it does not take into its consideration India's long-term priorities and instruments. Simply put, for example, a long-term strategic priority for India is a multipolarity, let's say, a global multipolarity. A long-term strategic instrument for India for that could be very much variable geometry is what they talk about, the Shiv Shankar Man and others. Those, once you put those, could you make your own argument starting with the Indian interest in strategic priorities and how that is played out, rather than seeing how they are reacting to Trump or Biden or whatever? Because I think there is a remarkable continuity as far as Indian priorities are concerned, and it does not totally jive with the US perspectives or strategic interests also. So I think the whole idea of Indian foreign policy should also take into account the economic aspects. And there again, for example, there's a different view, vis-a-vis China. India's economy is heavily dependent on China.
Okay, so any more questions, or we'll take this as the last one?
I think it has to be the last one.
Wrap it up, okay.
Yeah. Let me respond. Number one, I'm an American citizen. I live here, and we're in San Francisco. Consequently, we're looking from the standpoint of the United States. If I was in New Delhi, it would be a different matter. If I was an Indian citizen, it would be a different matter. I look upon this as an American. Second, one can have any number of differences with the Trump administration, and I certainly have mine. But the fact is, you have to deal with the administration in office, rather than this chimerical wish that we want a multipolar global order. I too would like to be as wealthy as Bill Gates. It ain't gonna happen, because I'm a university professor and I've resigned myself to that fate. So one can keep talking about multipolarity, but that's a wish list. You have to accept the world as it is. That's the global distribution of power. I would also like to see global poverty eliminated tonight. It's not going to happen. We have to accept the world as it is and negotiate the best possible deal that New Delhi can obtain. Second, yes, India is acutely dependent on China, and this is just utter folly. It has destroyed India's consumer goods industry. It cannot compete with China.
It sounds sounding like Trump.
Let's leave that aside.
I mean, you're saying
it cannot possibly. Its dependence on China is an abject disaster for India, and all it can do is to slowly disengage its economy from China, given the long-term threat that the PRC poses to India. And if someone doesn't recognize that, they're living in a fool's paradise.
On that optimistic note, we conclude this session. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rafiq.